Talk radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Welcome, Fade to Black. Today is Thursday, December 14th, 2023. Let's do this. Man, how you doing? How you doing? Very excited. I wanted to say happy holidays to everybody. It's creeping up on us fairly quickly. Today is December 14th, 9 days away from Christmas Eve, heading into holiday weekend. And, I've got a few holiday things that I've got to do this weekend because it is up on us. I can't believe it. So happy holidays, everybody. And I'm excited about the show tonight. I've been waiting for Mark to join the show for quite a while. And I've been a fan of his for many years. And finally, Marc Hartzman is with us. And I wanted to also say that, give the gift that keeps on giving. Get yourself a Fade to Black t-shirt. Get them for the entire family. We have 2 shirts, 2 ways to get them. The links are below. Get your Fade to Black shirts in time for the holidays. And everything is signed. Everything includes shipping. 2 ways to get them. You can just order a shirt and get yourself a Game Changer membership. You can gift a Game Changer membership if you go to the website. You can also do that too as well. So the links for that are below. And I just want to get straight to it tonight. Mark is with us. And we're going to be talking about, a lot of things tonight, but his book, We Are Not Alone, The Extraordinary History of UFOs and Aliens Invading Our Hopes, Our Fears, and Fantasies. We'll be talking about that and a whole lot more. And here's the thing. I normally don't read through a bio. I just want to get straight to the show. But here's the thing. In addition to his books about UFOs and ghosts and Mars, and he has Oliver Cromwell's embalmed head, and he's got a list of weird things on eBay too as well. I actually try to get to that. But he has also written for Mental Floss, Huffington Post, AOL Weird News, All That's Interesting.com, the Morbid Anatomy Online Journal, and Bizarre Magazine. He has discussed oddities on CNN, MSNBC, Ripley's radio, History Channel's The UnXplained. That's my old show. Wow. And the Travel Channel's Mysteries at the Museum. Now, listen, his links are below. It's very simple. MarcHartzmanBooks.com and WeirdHistorian.com. And I would like to welcome for the first time to Fade to Black. He's right here. I'm not kidding. There he is. Marc Hartzman. Mark, finally. How you doing, brother?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me, Jimmy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's always weird when you get to meet and talk with somebody that you've looked up to and followed for so many years. Because the old saying rings true, right? Be careful when you meet your heroes, right? but you're just one of the good guys, and I really appreciate that. I've been following you for a long time, and
thank you.
Very excited about tonight's show. But we have to do the first time guest disclaimer. Okay, so let's get that out of the way, which is, Mark, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. And where the conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends, but we're going to end as friends. Accept?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right, man. Man, you sound so good. I don't want to circle back to that conversation. Yeah, you sound really good. Here's kind of where I want to start. I do want to focus on contact and things. You have been researching this subject amongst everything else that you do, but you've been researching this for a very, very long time. Now, here's a hypothetical question that you've never been asked. You're sitting in front of Neil deGrasse Tyson. Right. and you're ready to go toe to toe, right? Okay, you're ready to go. Where do you start? What before I say what's the best piece of evidence, but how do you start that conversation?
Wow. That's a tough question. I think I would ask him what his thoughts are on finding extraterrestrial life somewhere, whether it's this galaxy or elsewhere, and how soon we might be able to find that based on the technology that we have and that we're continuing to develop, and what kind of evidence it would take for him to be convinced that it's there and potentially intelligent.
Do you think he's
getting into him coming here?
That's kind of a political answer. Okay, you're staying in bounds, but I'm going to get you to go out of bounds because he seems to be, and I never thought that I would see this day, but he seems to be shifting a little bit. And I think that part of the reason for that is data and where everything else seems to be headed. Do you see a day where somebody like him will do an about face because the government seems to be doing it, right? And the military seems to be doing it. Avi Loeb is doing it. Do you see a day where he would maybe change sides?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was going to say I wouldn't just come out with the question right out of the gate, because he'll say there's a billion cell phones every day taking pictures, so why don't we have a picture of them? I mean, that's the answer he typically gives. So why start right there? But I think what Avi Loeb is doing is so amazing and important, because he's a guy who, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, has a lot of clout, right? He has a lot of credibility. He has a lot of capability. And so when he's taking the subject seriously, and he has now the funding to actually get the equipment and start collecting his own data, and because of who he is, he's attracted all these other scientists to work with him. Years ago, that wouldn't have happened. Scientists did not want to talk about this publicly, but as the stigma is kind of going away, and Avi Loeb is outspoken about it and has an open mind about the whole situation, other people are willing to have an open mind also and work with him. So the data he's collecting we might actually learn something from it. And whatever we learn, I think will be interesting. We might learn something new about physics that we didn't know before, and that might explain a lot of what people are seeing and experiencing. Or, maybe we do find out that there is some extraterrestrial architecture, as he calls it, that's going through our solar system. Maybe there's actually life on it, maybe not. I mean, I talked about that a little bit, and we are not alone. There could be something there, and that could be very dangerous to us. We don't know. But the fact that they're actually looking for it now, they're open-minded, they're collecting data on it, we might learn something. And if we get that kind of data and there's some sort of real tangible evidence there, then I think Neil deGrasse Tyson would shift his point of view and be open to it and look for more information about it.
He would want to be on the right side of history.
Yeah, right? That's what science is all about, right?
Yeah, well, science is also about a whole lot of corrections, right? It's what it's about. And if you're a physicist, Avi, I've had the privilege of hanging out with Avi, and he's been on my TV show, and I've had dinner with him, and very cool cat. Okay, he's very, very cool. But there's another part of him, and he had, said to me that if you're a physicist, you need to have really thick skin, because no matter what you do, no matter what theory, algorithm, whatever you do, it's going to eventually be proven wrong, right? and it was like a dramatic. And I'm listening. And actually, he's 100% correct on that. And think about Brian Greene and what he did with string theory, how many decades he's worked on that. And I don't know, man, that might end up coming apart too as well. It's just a very interesting thing. So hopefully those out there that have been skeptical because it was the safe zone to be in are now realizing that the data is supporting an entirely different scenario.
Yeah, I mean that could be very true, right? And that is the thing. Like, there's no concrete in science, right? Like we keep learning, and you have to adjust, and you learn and reevaluate things. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's a really exciting time. I actually feel like we might learn something amazing in the next few years that
And
change everything.
what do you think? What would be something that we have the ability to understand if it was revealed?
The ability to understand.
Yeah, I mean, if it's way far advanced, I mean, we need to be able to wrap our head around it. I use this example all the time. If this cell phone is turned off, right, and you handed it to somebody 150 years ago, would they know it's a communication device? They don't have the ability to understand what this could be. So that's what I'm saying. It would have to be something that we could wrap our head around and hopefully utilize.
Yeah, I mean, if we find something here, then I would think that if we're able to find it and detect it, then we probably have maybe some chance of understanding at least a portion of it.
Mm.
It's such a big question. I mean, you just look at the scale of the universe and the timeline, and this tiny sliver of that timeline that we exist in right now, and all of humanity has existed in. And so, for something else to come here at the same point, I mean, what are the chances of that? Most likely, they're either far, far evolved, and that's a good reason to say that, like, well, that's why we can't detect them, because they're so far evolved and things we can't even imagine, and that's how they traverse space. And in some ways, that's an easy answer to be able to give because, well, yeah, how do you disprove that? You can't quite argue with that, right?
Right.
But it could be true. And if it is true, then yeah, it's hard to imagine we could understand any of it because you're right. I mean, you look at how far we've come, and you said 150 years. I mean, it's extraordinary how far we've come in 150 years. And again, that's a tiny piece of all of us, right? Of all of our existence. So imagine 150 years from now. I mean, I can't. 20 years ago, did you imagine like we'd be doing this?
No,
You
no, no, no,
so
no,
in our
no.
own,
At
a
all.
portion of our own lifetime.
At all.
Yeah.
It's you're absolutely right with that part of it. And then if we take a really close examination at different researchers over the years, and an example would be somebody like Stanton Friedman, who absolutely collected data, a warehouse full, right? And that kind of information just can't be denied. And there's just so much of it. I know that you recently went out and visited David Marler, who, man, I mean, I've got a huge admiration. And when you think about the amount of data and documents and sightings and cases and images and video and audio, it is an undeniable truth where we are today. The data is there. The skeptics, they have a really hard time, when they say, well, show me something. Man, go to Marler's house, right?
And he's got so much more now, by the way. I don't know if he just got all the app profiles, and it's now the National UFO Research
Historical Society.
Historical Society. I think that's right. Historical organization. I feel bad because I always get the letters confused in my head because it's brand new. But it's amazing what he's done gathering and collecting all these collections. And yeah, it is phenomenal. And just like you were saying, like in terms of the data, the evidence that he's collected, and that's in terms of photos, articles, recordings. I mean, he really has like every media player that goes back to like reel to reel in that room. And you hear things like, just a quick example, things like the Tic Tac UAP. And people think like, well, could that potentially be, Chinese technology, something really advanced? If it is, that's, I think, actually scarier than it being a extraterrestrial technology. But for
For sure.
example, maybe they find ways to explain how some of the things that Navy pilots are seeing now. But then you look at, like, if you were to go check out his archive, you'll find the similar reports of similar shaped crafts doing similar types of maneuvers that go back to, 40s and 50s. And you couldn't argue that the Chinese may have had that back then. So again, like you're saying, like, there is more evidence, and most of that is discounted by people seriously just, looking into things now, but it is there to be looked at. And that's what's so great. He's preserving all this for any researcher to take advantage of and explore.
Have you actually want to start here? Have you had your own sighting?
I haven't. And I mentioned that in the book.
I know.
Yeah, not that I'm open to it. I did see something weird in New Mexico when I visited David Marler, though. I will say that. Which was
besides David himself. Okay. So, what a distinguished guy, by the way. Our community needs to look up. There are a few out there that represent us really, really well, and he's one of them. He's just an incredible person. But what did you see when you were out there?
I have no idea. So it was New Mexico. I got in late. I was staying at an Airbnb place kind of in a remote area outside of Albuquerque. And so, it's a beautiful night sky. So I got to the place around 10 o'clock, and I just wanted to stand outside and look up at the stars, more stars I'm going to see here in New York. And I'm staring up, and lots of stars in the sky. And I just see something, this is tiny of a dot as the stars themselves, just zipping around like this all over the place. And I'm rubbing my eyes. I'm like, am I just tired? Like, what am I seeing? This is so weird. Everything else is still as you would expect it to be, right? And this thing is just zipping around like a moth, by your light bulb or something. Like, what the hell is that? It can't be a satellite or anything. It's not. It's just literally the size of one of the stars, just a little dot in the sky, but zipping all over the place. And closing my eyes, rubbing them, and I just keep seeing it, just right there. Nothing else is moving. So I have no idea what that was. But that was kind of weird. It was weird because it was happening in New Mexico while I was working on this book. New Mexico has such a history.
And there's something about New Mexico, and I think we're all, it's so mysterious, and there's so much history there. And I'm driving to Roswell from Albuquerque, and I'm down on the freeway, and I'm not making this up either, man. This is how crazy this story is. So, and I'm driving, I'm in a rental car, and I had spilled a chocolate shake. There's a reason for that to be in this UFO story. And so I've got to do something about that. But as that happened, I look up out of the driver's window and I see in the clouds a flying saucer. And it's like black with a white ring of lights around it, like right out of the movies. And I went, friggin' New Mexico, you've got to be kidding me. And I'm trying to drive. I got a spilled chocolate shake. I'm staring at this thing in the clouds. I'm like, oh my God. Oh man. And I pulled over. There's a rest stop. And I pull over because I've got to deal with this chocolate shake. And I've got to get my cell phone out to take a picture of this flying saucer, right? So I pull over into the rest stop. I park the car, I jump out, and I look up. It was a ring of lights on the top of a light pole. A really tall light pole. So from this side, okay, so when I was driving, can't see it. It's a little foggy, it's a little misty, the cloud, the thing, but it's funny. Just up in the clouds. I pull into the truck, I just turn around and look, and it's on a pole. And it had me. I mean, my heart, I was losing it. And
perfectly good explanation this time.
I didn't take a picture. I didn't take a picture. But now and then, the reason why I asked that and I said what I just said, there's a lot of photographs out there today of things like what I saw. If I didn't know, and if I took a picture and I posted that online, people would lose their minds because it looked, absolutely genuine. But apparently there are sightings all around the world now. And well, there always have been, but now they're getting reported. People are talking about this out front, and elected officials in the military. Why do you think suddenly it's okay to not only report, but to talk, and pilots and commercial pilots where it was always taboo? This last couple of years, the floodgates have opened. Why do you think that is?
I mean, to me, it all goes back to that 2017 article in the New York Times. The fact that the New York Times prints a UFO story on the front page. That's unusual, right? So like automatically gives it a little bit of credibility, like, oh, like they're talking about this, what's going on? And then they reveal this Pentagon program, and they have the two Navy videos at the time that they released. And so you're seeing something unusual, and you're hearing about these unusual sightings from Navy pilots who are very credible. And they're seeing these amazing things, and they're not saying that they're UFOs. They just said, we saw something we can't explain. And so I think that started to really break the stigma at that point, and then it's been all over. It's been all over mainstream media. 60 Minutes was interviewing these guys, and all this respected media is actually talking about the subject and looking into it. Of course, they're changing the term from UFO to UAP to, again, try to distance themselves from that stigma. And a lot of that, I get into this in the book also. This was a lot really spearheaded by Christopher Mellon, who approached it as a national defense issue, not necessarily a UFO issue. And I think that's helped people take it more seriously and question it, because the essence of it is there are things in the sky that we can't identify in American airspace, right? So what's going on? Why can't we identify it? That's a bit of a problem, because if we don't know what it is, it's potentially a threat that's going to, could cause a real problem later that we could really regret if we don't take it seriously and look into it. So there's something to be learned here. And when he takes that approach, that's what gets, Congress interested. That's why, congressmen are taking it seriously and looking into it and having hearings and so forth. And when all that's happening, it starts to become okay to, I think, to talk about it. And pilots are being encouraged to report now. That's something they didn't want to do before, because they would have been, ostracized and not, thought they were kooks or whatever. And that's changing now because they're trying to learn. Finally, the attitude is actually changed. And I hope it stays that way. I get a little worried sometimes when you have we have this momentum, I think, towards actually getting people taking it seriously. I mean, I'm interrupting myself now, but if you imagine that this was going on 30, 40 years ago, people like Avi Loeb and Christopher Mellon, who were actually pushing for knowledge, what would we know by now if scientists had been taking it seriously and actually collecting data? We might know a lot more than we do, because it's just been left unstudied for so long. No one's been collecting the data to study it seriously, or scientifically at least. So I wonder where we would be. But I do worry about, like, the guy in Mexico a couple months ago with the Congress of Mexico, who had the mummified aliens, and I worried that, like, is that going to start interrupting where we are now? Because people are going to say, oh, look, this guy had these weird mummified things he said were aliens, but they were fakes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Does that take away credibility from others? I don't know, but I'd like to see the momentum continue where it's going.
Does it have to? You're right about that. The fear factor, right? That's what gets everybody's attention, and that's the money that drives Washington, D.C. National security. You throw that label on it, and then people pay attention. If we found out, or if we knew that ET was actually friendly, then there probably wouldn't be that attention that is placed on it today, right? And that is it's a paradox, right? It's a double-edged sword, where we wouldn't get the attention so we should be thankful, I guess, that they are playing the fear card, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems, I mean, if they're there, they seem friendly because we're still here. So
Right.
seems like good news. But I mean, who knows what happens if they ever do show up and they're friendly? I mean, one of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes is To Serve Man, where they were very friendly until we found out they weren't. So
Yeah, it was
who knows what mission they might be on that's very long term.
a cookbook. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And with that, staying on this point, the momentum as it has gathered, Giorgio Tsoukalos on this show, probably it's been a minute now, probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, said, Jimmy, when ET gets here, and they will, and we start talking, we'll find out that everyone was wrong. And it was just something that, it really grabbed me, because he's not wrong. He's actually very, very correct. We can have all of the theories and ideas and stuff presented, but we may not have a clue on anything. We could be completely wrong about this. And that's the part of the unknown, I think, that freaks everybody out.
And when ET comes, who's to say it's the only one? I mean,
tens of thousands just in the Milky Way, maybe millions. Yeah. That's it's just such a strange point that we want to argue, and we want to talk about this and hypothesize. But you said it really well. J. Allen Hynek wrote about this in 76 and 77 in his first two books, where he was angry and, in a weird way, apologetic that he didn't push for more scientific study when he was running Project Blue Book. Instead, he was just a yes man that was going along for the ride and agreeing with the Air Force. Again, national security issues that were always coming into play. But you're right. If Hynek would have had his way 60 years ago, we would be much farther along.
Yeah. It's amazing to think what we might know now. And again, what we might know might not be about aliens. It might be just more about ourselves and about our own world. To me, either way, it's fascinating. Like, either way, I think we're going to learn something pretty incredible. Hopefully soon.
Well,
I actually wonder. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I wonder. Just in terms of where we are with technology today, we kind of talked about this before, like how much further is it going to go, and we've seen it rapidly advance in the last couple of years just with AI. So let's say we do get phone pictures from our phones or videos from our phones or whatever it is. How many people are going to believe it unless you saw it with your very own eyes? Because things can be faked so easily now that you wonder, like, the fact that we might finally have the technology that maybe we need to actually get evidence, right, to capture something. Maybe we couldn't capture things before, whatever. What if it's not until we have the technology to actually capture what we need to see, and that same technology is exactly what also makes people not believe it, so, because it can do so many other things. I don't know. It's a weird thing I've been thinking about recently.
We're right there. I mean, there's an app for that now, right? Fake UFO, right? And
that stuff is good.
Yeah, and it's good. It's real good. Well, that's why when you do your research for something, it's the old data. Before all this modern stuff, right? It's the old data when, because today we know that we have Mach 10 aircraft, right? We've got Aurora, we've got hypersonic this, we probably have anti-gravity. We have these things today, but they didn't have that in 1947, 1910. And when in a 1950 Air Force report about a radar blip that was, being tracked for 3 hours, traveling 3,000 miles an hour. That's interesting. because there was nothing in the sky back then that could do it. So going back to not only looking at Roswell, but the historical cases like, Lonnie Zamora, New Mexico, where you brought up, the Tic Tac. Well, Lonnie Zamora saw a Tic Tac, if you really think about it.
Yeah,
And and so it's that those historical sightings to me are probably just as fascinating or more valuable than what is going on today, because today we do have tech.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's a kind of a fascinating issue. Like, will we actually believe when it happens? And then how much will people care if it happens? How much will they say, oh, okay, that's interesting, and get back to scrolling through, TikTok or whatever? I mean, I kind of wonder too, like, just where we're all going.
Well, with the I'm going to show you an image really quick. I just got back from Peru and last week. Okay. And so while I was there, you brought up the mummies, right? Okay, so I go to Peru. I do the whole thing. I fly over the Nazca lines and Machu Picchu. I did all that stuff, and it was just absolutely amazing. But I went by invitation. I went to an archaeologist. He's retired now. In a little town, a town of 50 people, maybe 100, and he showed us a mummy that he discovered in a tomb 40 years ago. And he was sued by the Peruvian government for possession of this mummy, and he won. They wanted it, he won, and there you go. So I go and I see this, and as I'm pulling it up, I'm scrolling through these images. It's going to take me a couple of seconds. But as I pull this up, this is a mummy of a child that is 1.5 years old. The entire mummy, from the top of its skull, it doesn't have its legs, from the top of its skull down to the base of its tailbone is about a foot. That's it. It's about this big. Okay. Now keep that in mind. It's 1.5 years old. And when I see this and I'm looking at it, my brain was having a real difficult time understanding what it was that I was looking at, because it made absolutely no sense. And man, I've got I took 3,800 images in Peru, 3,800. And so you can imagine how long it took me to download all of this. So the head looks large. The head looks like it's a normal sized human skull. The head is actually about the size of a baked potato. Okay. And it is it's half the size of the mummy itself. And I passed it up, and now I've got to go back through. It's right. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is, what would it take to convince somebody, right? That's the whole trick. What will it? But I think it's something like this, because I can't figure this out. So take a look at this. And like I said, from the top of the skull to its tailbone is about a foot. That skull is the size of a baked potato. It's like this big. It's small. It's very small. And it's 1.5 years old. Now check this out. Are you ready? 1.5 years old. It hasn't healed the hole, right? You ready? It's got adult teeth. Take a look.
Yeah. Wow.
Adult teeth. This is 1.5 years old. This is a tiny. It's this big. It's this big with the full set of adult teeth. You can see where they were. And then, as if that wasn't enough, look at the eye sockets. These eye sockets are bigger than yours if you measured it. But the skull is this big. And the eyes are ginormous. They're like huge. And it doesn't make any sense. And that's a 1.5-year-old child. Now, explain, just somebody help me understand. So I interviewed 2 doctors about this mummy on camera who were looking at it. One was a surgeon, one was an ER physician, okay? Both with 10, 12 years of medical school. Very serious people. I've never seen confusion like this. They're just looking. And I had asked them, is there some kind of disease? Is there anything that would suggest this kind of deformity? They said, no, this is how this baby was born. And I don't know. This is very, very, very strange to me. And it's not old enough to have been boarded, right? You're a Ripley's Believe It or Not guy.
It looked like, they did wrap the heads and do the elongation of the skull, but
that took years and years and years to do. This is a newborn. This is a year and a half old baby.
Huh.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, especially you're right, the giant eye sockets are very
huge.
Very curious.
Huge. And I just don't know. I don't know. Oh, okay. You ready for this? Here's the closer, if there is one. 10 ribs, not 12. Right. And they're pointing in the wrong direction.
Yeah, that is weird. How old is this supposed to be?
1.5 years.
No, but like the skeleton itself, like age.
About 1,000 years.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about 1,000 years old. It's about 1,000 years old. And I'm just one of the where I need help from not going crazy, right? I don't want to jump into the deep end of the pool. And then you see something like this, and you're like, well, man, somebody's lying to us.
Well, these are the kinds of things that I think keep the subject so fascinating, right? There's always an element of mystery to it. Just when you think you might have an answer here, something else pops up that's still unexplainable, and kind of keeps the whole thing fun, right?
Well, and then here's right when you have like your book, We Are Not Alone. It's a numbers game and I talked to Avi Loeb about this, and he straightened me out on this. But sitting at dinner, and we're talking about the amount of planets in the Milky Way, and he starts throwing out these facts, and I'm trying to go toe to toe, right, with a Harvard physicist. And he says, look, man, there's 1 trillion stars in the Milky Way, and there's at least one planet with each one. That means there's over a trillion planets in the Milky Way. Now, when you start to break that down, Jimmy, how many of them have water and are in the Goldilocks zone? And he's throwing numbers at me. He's like, 40 billion, 100 billion. Out of each one of those, and remember, there's 1,000 million in each billion, and we're talking about 100 billion planets, and you take a small percentage that has advanced life on it, you're talking about tens of millions of advanced civilizations. It's a numbers game these days, and I think that's where we're at. What's that?
It's the Drake equation.
Completely.
Yeah.
Do you think, I haven't talked about the Drake equation in a long time. You think the Drake equation would have been written or thought about differently? Because when Frank Drake did that, he came up with a number of 10,000 civilizations, right?
At the low end.
That was the 1955 data, right? It was literally, right? And now today, if you plug in the numbers that we have today, the Drake equation is going to spit out something like 150 million. It's not going to be 10,000. And that's why I think Avi Loeb and others, it's a numbers game. They can't deny the data. It's a data-driven, science world that we live in.
Yeah, and again, that's where it feels like, well, with those numbers, surely something else is out there. And then the other question is like, did those intelligent civilizations evolve and last around the same time that we're here now? So, for example, if a civilization evolved and it developed the capability to achieve interstellar travel, were we here? Was anything here when they got here? Maybe they got here, saw nothing, went back and continued on. I mean, imagine we see something now with like James Webb or something and we don't see anything, but who knows? 2,000 years from now, maybe something starts developing. Maybe it's a lot longer than that, but you know what I mean? It's like, do those timelines line up? It's 13 billion years, right? The universe. I think that number has actually maybe changed recently, but the idea is we're a blip. And can we line up to actually ever establish a communication or have some contact with each other? To me, it's a fascinating part of this whole thing, that the timeline issue. We'll see. I actually talked about in the book, another planetary scientist I spoke with, Pascal Lee, takes the Drake equation and questions whether the answer might just be one. And are we it really? At least in this galaxy, not the whole universe. But it's an interesting question. Like, what if we are the first and we will be spreading? I mean, we're already spraying out we've got robots on Mars. We'll be having humans there soon, within a decade or two, I'm sure. Will we spread life across the universe? Maybe we're the first. It's an interesting thought. But he talks about like all the planets, all the numbers, the fact that we're in the edge of the galaxy, which is a safe zone to be in the galaxy. And more in the center, you got gamma ray bursts that just massive explosions, like entire power of our sun exploding over 24 hours and wiping out anything that may have been evolving. Maybe life was on its way and then it's just gone. So it's a dangerous area, even if there's planets and exoplanets that could be in the Goldilocks zone. Maybe they don't get a chance to last long enough. I don't know, but just interesting other variables in that discussion.
If let's go to another hypothetical here. Speaking of to serve man, right? Okay, so what is a scarier thought? I mean, if humanity, everybody on this planet suddenly came to the realization that there was no life in the universe, that we are all there is, doesn't that cause trauma? I mean, isn't that just like the most devastating news ever? The one question that we've always had since Stone Age man, are we alone? What's going on out there? And we find out that we are all that there is.
Yeah. I agree. It is sad. It's an interesting thought. It's funny, first of all, if you think about like, it is an age-old question. Absolutely. But most of like civilization, they believed the other planets were populated. Like up till the early 1900s, there was a lot of belief, especially like in the earlier centuries. They just assumed that there was beings on all the other planets. And I wrote about in the Big Book of Mars, an amateur astronomer who was doing a census of the other planets, taking data from Great Britain and extrapolating and what he knew about the size of other planets and figuring out the populations. I mean, this was just like what they thought, So the belief that, there's nothing else out there. I think now most people assume there's nothing else out there. I mean, a lot of people believe in aliens, of course, but scientifically, it's just assumed that we're probably it until we find actual evidence. So I don't know. It is a weird thought. It is a scary thought, like that we could just be it. And also, to me, it kind of relates. We talked about this before the show. How everything's kind of connected. And to me, it's the same kind of thought as like, do you want to believe that after death there's just nothing, or that there is some sort of afterlife and we go on? And I'd rather believe that there's something else after life, for the same, or after death, for the same reason, that like it's just depressing and sad to think that on this little, pale blue dot in the universe, that this is it. We die, that's it. There's nothing else out there. And as Carl Sagan said also, it'd be a huge waste of space if there's nothing else out there at all, just stars and planets doing nothing.
I had Cody Blue on the other day, the film director. He's a great guy, great mind, very talented. And I was letting my head go, and I let this slip, but it's kind of true, actually, that if we were talking about this, and if I found out definitively, like for a fact, that there was no life after death and there is nothing else in the universe, I'm burning this thing down. I'm gonna party. I'm not gonna pay my bills. What's the use of taking care of this planet? Who gives a crap? Right? I mean, there's no hope. There's no reason to dream. There isn't any extraterrestrial brothers and sisters to meet and greet. There's no reason to clean our bedroom, right?
I agree. We need to hope. We need to have hope, because why would you choose? I mean, I think I ended chasing ghosts this way. I think we have a choice to either believe or not believe. We don't have the evidence, right? Either way. So why not choose to believe? Because then it's good to have the hope. Why wouldn't you want that? Why would you want the bleak side of things, right? I just find that depressing.
Man, I would have a good time. I can tell you that right now. I would have a good time, but that's it's a frightening thought, because if we flip the other side and we look at the realistic part of this, the sun is eventually going to destroy this planet. Okay, we can't live here forever. We think, there's an assumption there that this planet will, could potentially just be here for trillions of years. That's not the case. Our sun's going to blow up and then die out and eat this planet. We need to blow this popsicle stand before that happens. So what would bring us together, Mark? Building a ship and start making plans to split. We can't stay, right? And maybe that's the hope that we need, and that would bring the planet together. A goal to save humanity, because we cannot stay here. And I think that's part of it. Whether you believe in life after death or not, maybe you want humanity to continue.
Yeah.
And that would bring us together, and forget about war. And I don't want to sound like a hippie, but you know what I mean? But put all of that, all those issues aside, and let's figure out a way to get out of here so we can survive. I think that would bring us together.
It's a good common goal, the preservation of humanity. How could you be against that?
Do you think that we came from Mars? Was there an exchange, right? That Mars is now a dead planet. Is it possible that we were all Martians to begin with?
I mean, it kind of is. I mean, I quoted someone in the Big Book of Mars saying that the two planets have been swap and spit, basically was what he said, because, meteorites go back and forth and they land. And so who knows if, a few billion years ago, something with some sort of microorganism on a meteorite came from Mars and landed here and was able to flourish here that it couldn't flourish on Mars in certain ways and evolve. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Of course, then the question would be like, well, where did they come from on Mars? I mean, you just sort of remove it a step from the question we have here. So yeah, I mean, who knows? I find that to be kind of a fascinating question, that maybe it's gone back and forth. And it could happen again, because we're going back to Mars now, right? So imagine that we do die out here. It's a little bit like, Martian Chronicles type of situation, and Earth goes to crap, burns or whatever. But we've made it to Mars, and now we're flourishing on Mars. And Maybe it cycles back and forth
Yeah,
over billions of years.
It's really a funny thought that with the expansion of the sun, the Earth may get touched, right? But it may not, but no matter what, it's going to be really hot here. But Mars may survive. So isn't that funny how we may have to first go to a dead planet and kickstart it again? Right? Figure out a way to get an atmosphere there just for our survival. It's a really fascinating thought. And then in the end, maybe, well, I don't know if we would come back here. I think this would be a cinder block by that point. But yeah, wouldn't that be funny if we came from Mars, came to here because Mars got its atmosphere blown away. Then we're going to have to leave here and go back to Mars because this atmosphere is eventually going to be blown away. It's a fascinating thing to think about.
It would be. I talk about in the big book of Mars also just the questions of like, how would colonization work on Mars? So let's say we can get there and we can create the atmosphere and we can find ways to survive. But the one thing that's such an unknown is how the 1/3 gravity would affect the human body. So, for example, will women be able to get pregnant in 1/3 gravity? Will that work in the body? If it doesn't, then what? So, and if it does, what do Martian offspring look like? How will they grow? Will they actually look like people used to envision Martians? Will they be taller? Will they have bigger heads? Skinny legs because will the gravity allow them to grow taller and taller? So it's kind of an interesting question of what might we actually become. I also talked about how maybe it's not Mars. But another scientist I talked to suggested that we live inside of Deimos, one of the 2 moons of Mars. And he suggested we drill a hole, like core out Deimos, and then build space stations that go inside of Deimos that create artificial gravity so we can live like, we are here, basically just recreate an atmosphere for us. And then you have the shell of Deimos protecting us from all the solar radiation. So we're completely protected and we live inside space stations inside the moon of Mars. And he said that would be a much safer way to go because Mars is so brutal to our bodies. Mars would just be, it would not be hospitable to humans at all. We'd have to do a lot of work. But I thought that was an interesting idea. And I asked him, like, well, how do you drill a hole in the moon? Like that sounds hard. And he said, well, he says the first thing people have to do is stop laughing about it. And about 20 years after that, we could do it. And he had a good point. He's like, people used to laugh about, flight in general, like a machine flying in the air. That's ridiculous. But once people stopped joking about it, put science and physics behind it, the Wright brothers flew, and then 30 years after that, you got Charles Lindbergh crossing the ocean. Then you got 30 years after that, we're on the moon.
Woodstock, Jimi Hendrix. Yeah. It's I can't.
You can do it.
Yeah, when we just stop and look at that timeline, 60 years. I'm 60 years old, right? So in my lifetime, right, in 60 years, I would have seen the Wright brothers, right? And Jimi Hendrix. What? Yeah. What? What? That's nuts. Wright brothers, jet engines, nuclear power, televisions, right? Jimi Hendrix, right? Like to Led Zeppelin, from covered wagons to Led Zeppelin in 60 years. That's crazy town.
And those poor people on covered wagons had no Led Zeppelin, which is just sad. That's the saddest thing of all this.
You know what? Every time I fly, I fly a few times a month, right? And I never get rid of this thought. Flying over the Rockies and coming into Los Angeles and looking at the mountains and thinking about how much that sucked, right? In a covered wagon. I mean, you got your wife, your kids, your dogs, your horses, and those mountains with no roads, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Woo!
I think about that sometimes. It's amazing that we're still here as a species. Like, how the hell did we get through all these centuries of living like that?
Having to turn to your wife going, okay, just one more hill, honey. I promise.
Right.
Just,
Right.
just one more. On the other side of this is a valley with a lake. We're going to build a cabin
It
and you
must have
cross.
smelled
And
awful, you know?
there's another
wouldn't even-
one.
Yeah.
I just
marvel at the fact that we're still here.
yeah, it's unreal to me. Just driving on the Grapevine like one time. It's and if you think about it, you're in New York and heading out, going west out of New York. That is not smooth sailing. New Jersey's no joke. Pennsylvania's no joke, right? I mean, that's just crazy. How did they do it in 1820? I mean, 1830, 1840, 1850. I just don't know how it got done. It's mind blowing.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. Just the basics, right? Like eating and drinking must have been a nightmare.
Now, and there's a reason why I'm bringing this up, because going from that to where we are today with the James Webb and TESS and radar telescopes, radio telescopes, where we can peer and see into the atmosphere of planets 10, 20, 30, 40 light years away, 100 light years away. Light years, not, I'm not talking about the miles. We throw in the miles and people don't understand. We have that ability where 20 years ago, we didn't even know if there was another planet outside of our solar system. That's a pretty extraordinary technical leap for the search for extraterrestrial life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it is. It's hard to conceive of those numbers. A light year is 6 trillion miles. And like you said, we're talking 10, 20, 100, whatever it is, but it's really hard to conceive of that kind of distance. But that's the stuff. I mean, I really get fascinated by that we can detect, biosignatures in the atmosphere. And that's where I think we'll really know soon if there is at least something living, that to me, that would be pretty exciting to have actual data evidence. It's like, oh yeah, this planet, we see that there's something alive there. Don't know what it is yet, but that's pretty cool, And then, I talked about technosignatures also, and we are not alone. And the idea of being able to detect other elements in atmospheres and kind of piecing together, based on those levels. And there's lots of, climate modeling that goes involved, a lot of heavy science stuff. But basically, they'll be able to tell from this different data through James Webb and the follow-up telescope will launch in 10 or 20 years, I think. They'll be able to detect whether or not the pollution in the atmosphere is coming from some form of technology. And if it's technology, that means it's artificially created, which means that there's some intelligent life that's created it, which may exist on that planet. On the other hand, it may not exist on that planet. It could be somewhere else, just like we have rovers on Mars and we're not there, right? So there's technology on Mars, but there's no people or whatever, any life. Although there might be life, but that's another conversation. But so to me, it's just another fascinating question. Like maybe we'll find that there's intelligent life, but we might not even know still where it is. Again, it just keeps going. But
now, what would you consider? I'm going to take a break right here, and we'll follow up with this when we come back. Forget about the scientists. Forget about the astrophysicists and those running the programs. What would you consider a technosignature?
On an exoplanet?
Yeah, we can talk about CO2 or pollution. Okay, I'm going to go further with that. But what would you consider? I mean, pollution is one thing, right? And methane or whatever it may be. But for you, what would get you excited?
Some form of communication would be very exciting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Whether it's some sort of radio wave, television imagery, something being pushed out that can be received.
Avi, Brian Green has mentioned this too as well. But Avi said that he believes that we will soon have the ability to see city lights in the dark on an exoplanet.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
incredible.
Yeah, it's just crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's again when you think of the distance and to be able to see that. Yeah,
the way that Avi speaks, and when he's looking at you in the eyes and says something like that, you can't come back with anything.
Yeah. I mean, like, okay.
Yeah, that's it. It's just like, okay, all right.
Lamps. I want to see them.
Exactly. Let's take our break right here. Our guest tonight, Marc Hartzman. We've got a lot to talk about. We will continue everything right after this. Stay with us.
My job is not to preach. My job is to take you on this journey.
In a state of passion, nothing negative can happen.
That it's the moons of those planets that would have life.
Sometimes I see, these energies also in your field.
It is our passion and our pleasure.
Hi, everybody. Jimmy Church here. Very special announcement, and that is we are shipping Fade to Black t-shirts again. It's been almost 2 years. We did a full upgrade to the website, so you can head over to jimmychurchradio.com. It's all simple to do, and it's right there. Remember, we broadcast 4 nights a week, Monday through Thursday. We bring you the best, the brightest, the most knowledgeable and amazing guests, the best conversations. We do that 4 nights a week. We also do 4 days a week. We broadcast the news, and we do that live too as well. It's not a one-man show. I do it with website support. I do it with producers. I do it with writers and artists. All contribute to the show. The best way to help support what we do here is with the Fade to Black t-shirt. And you can get your Fade to Black t-shirt one of 2 ways. First, go to jimmychurchradio.com, order a shirt. It's really that simple. You're going to get a tracking number, it's going to get shipped, and it's going to get autographed. The second way to get a shirt is with a Game Changer membership. Now, the Game Changer membership not only includes a free t-shirt, but you get a private email to me. You get unlimited commercial-free downloads. You have full access to the website, and everything includes free shipping, and everything is autographed. So help support the show. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. The links are below. You can just go to jimmychurchradio.com, and it's right on the website. So there you go. I'm Jimmy Church, Fade to Black. I'm so excited that I just have one thing to say. Go Packley Tappy. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Marc Hartzman is with us. And Mark, picking up where we left off, the ability to attempt to detect other forms of communication out there. And SETI has just announced in a press release a couple of days ago that they are going to start looking in low frequency bandwidths where we typically broadcast in. They've been looking in higher frequencies, hydrogen bandwidths and so forth. But they are going to do just that. How would we understand that is what we are picking up? Because they could be in a different time scale. We would have to understand what we are looking at. How would you search for extraterrestrial communication? What would you look for?
That's a tough question. I don't know. I mean, it's like, I'm amazed that they can even look for what they're looking for, and I talked about the fact that they've the analogy Jill Tarter gave is they've done like a cup of water out of the whole ocean in terms of what they look for. So first of all, how do you look? And also, where do you look? Where are you pointing these radio telescopes and trying to pick up on something? And, how old is that signal that you're getting? So yeah, I mean, I don't know what specifically you look for, because it also goes back to what we were saying before, who knows what kind of technology they might have? Can we even pick up the technology that they have? Would we recognize the technology that they have? It's a difficult question. You know what I mean? We're assuming that we'll find radio waves because we've made radio waves, but who's to say that they didn't do something entirely different and another level of physics or something that they're using? So I don't know. I mean, I think, we look for things that are through the lens of our own knowledge, right? So we look for kind of what we know, and that's a bit of a limitation automatically. But it's all we can do, I guess.
The other part of it is, here's an example. It's a numbers game. There is definitely a lot of advanced extraterrestrial life out there. Okay. And if they are traveling between the stars. So how do you communicate in real time? You're not doing it at the speed of light. That wouldn't work. And in an example of that, so you have to then think outside of the box and think in those terms. Because if you and I go to Alpha Centauri, it's 4.5 light years away, right? It's our nearest neighbor. It's 4.5 light years. It's literally in our backyard, but it's 4.5 light years. So if you and I jet out there, right, and we get a flat tire, it's going to take 4.5 years for us to call 911. And another 4.5 years to get the answer, right? So now we have 9. So ET is not communicating that way. There's something else going on that isn't limited to the speed of light. And that's what we have to figure out, a way to detect. And it may just be something as simple as entanglement. I'm not sure. but that is certainly that's at the speed of now, right? That's not at the speed of light. That's instantaneous. But I think that's where science has got to start thinking that way instead of in terms of where we are now with radio waves. We've only had radio for 150 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so ET would have to be looking for us in that 150-year window. Before that, we got nothing, right? We've got...
Yeah, I mean, unless they were detecting, like we're trying to do with James Webb, they were looking for biosignatures in our atmosphere. We've been giving those off since we've been alive. So if they were looking for that, they might at least know that there was something here. But again, they wouldn't know what it was until actually they got here or could have telescopes that could read streetlights like Avi Loeb says we'll be doing. And who knows, maybe they had that. They didn't see any streetlights back when they were looking.
What's your take on the ancient alien theory that we have had contact with ancient civilizations going back thousands, if not tens of thousands of years?
So a couple things. One is, I talked about a few of these cases in We're Not Alone, and a lot of things I think that we are underestimating the ingenuity of humankind to think that some things just could not have been made by humans in one way or another. But I also think that if aliens were helping us and assisting us in some way, I'd like to think that they would have done it in a different way. And again, I'm kind of using what we have as an example now, which is what we're doing on Mars. So we've sent rovers over there. We've got orbiters, right? And before we send humans there, we'll send rovers that can 3D print habitats that we can go in safely when we land so that we're ready to go. We'll have stuff there. So we're not just simply using everything that's already on Mars. I mean, we'll use Martian resources, but we'll bring stuff from Earth to help us and prepare us for Martian life, right? Atmosphere. So I kind of would like to think that if aliens were intelligent enough to get here thousands of years ago, that they would have done something similar, brought some technology with them and used some of that technology rather than just get here, use the rocks that they found and then left. It feels like there'd be something left behind that would be a clear bit of evidence that something else was here to me. That's kind of where my head's at with that.
Okay, well, give me an example of what you're thinking.
So, like in terms of like the pyramids, for example, some people believe that aliens maybe created the pyramids. Would they have just come here and said, like, here's a bunch of rocks on Earth, let's just stack them like this. This is how we like it. This is how we'll communicate or whatever, someone might think that they're doing, versus it being, Egyptian tombs, and it was built by thousands of people over many, many years and using different techniques to move the boulders. And there's evidence now that the Nile had a stream going by the pyramids that could have carried some of these heavy slabs and stones and so forth. So maybe there are ways that was actually possible to do with just brute human strength, thousands of people, a long, long time, right? It's not out of the realm of possibility. And if it was aliens, that's where I think, just like we would go to Mars and 3D print something in advance, I feel like they would have brought technology to make these things. I think they would feel more unique than just rock from Earth. I guess that's where I'm coming from with that.
Yeah, there is. I'm not into debating, but there's some holes in your thought process. And I'll just give a couple of just brief examples. Freight trains, semi-trucks, and the biggest cranes that we have on this planet right now cannot move those rocks. Period. You can't put a 250-ton stone on the back of a transporter of any kind. It just wouldn't work. It'd break. The steel wouldn't. That's it. And we don't have a crane that could pick that stuff up. So when you go to Sacsayhuaman, or you go to the Assyrian in Egypt. The Great Pyramid is an example because we see it so often. But you go to the Assyrian at the Temple of Seti, the first in Abydos, and you look at those stones. Those stones are red granite, 20 feet tall, 15 feet wide, and weigh hundreds and hundreds of tons. And they're perfect. Perfect. They look like they were made yesterday. Tell me how Stone Age man quarried that and moved them and put those there in place. I have a hard time. I don't know. I'm not saying it was aliens, but we couldn't do it today. We simply could not do it. You go to Sacsayhuaman, man, Sacsayhuaman, these stones are as big as a house. And they have thousands of them, as big as a house, bigger than the house that you live in right now. And I don't even know the size of your house. And they're bigger than that, one stone. I don't know. So could it be, is it possible? I sound like Robert Clotworthy, right? From Ancient Aliens. Could it be ancient alien theory?
Yes.
But,
say yes.
Say because it doesn't make any sense. You can't put one of those stones on the back of a semi truck. Doesn't work that way. The biggest transporters that we have at quarries, these giant dump trucks, couldn't. No. That have tires that are a story tall, right? That we have today, and that's the part where it's confusing. If we can't do it today, how did they do it 5,000 years ago? They didn't have boats on the displacement, the size of a boat that it would take for 100-ton block of granite. 100-ton. What kind of boats did they have 5,000 years ago floating up and down the Nile? I haven't seen any evidence of that, but yet they got from Aswan and went 500 miles north to Cairo, to Giza, and those stones made it there. I just don't know how. I don't know how. It just doesn't make any sense. These are questions that need to be answered, but we can't just accept the dogma, Mark, that we have been told over the years. Well, they pulled it across the desert with water on the sand, and they just, they pulled them. How? What do you mean they pulled them? Here's one of the things that I laugh at the most, that the pyramid took 20 years to build, right? With 20,000 people. All right. Okay. Well, we believe that because we've been told it enough times. The stones that are above the king's chamber, all right, there's 5 floors of them. There's 70 of them that weigh between 70 and 100 tons each, okay? From Aswan, if you drag them in the desert at a foot a minute, it would take 400 years. So don't tell me that the pyramid was made in 20 years. And that's just those 70 stones, right? There's another pyramid right next to it that was allegedly built at the same time. That also took 2.5 million blocks. That also took 20,000 people. The population of Egypt at 5,000 BC was only 400,000 people in the entire country. So that would mean that 40,000, half of that is 200,000 men. So every able-bodied man in the country of Egypt was building pyramids. And that's just 2. They built 75 in 100 years. So I don't know. It doesn't add up.
It's a lot of fascinating questions. And so if aliens came to help us do this, why? And why aren't they come back? Or if they come back, then we can say that they have come back, but how come not to the extent where they're interacting with us on that level? Sure.
And it doesn't even have to be aliens, right? But somebody taught somebody how to do that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't want to drop the Atlantis, scenario, but somebody taught somebody how to do this. And we're not even talking about Göbekli Tepe, and that was 7,000 years before. But the thought of Stone Age man, tribes coming out of the desert in Egypt one day wearing animal skins, and then the next day, because Giza was built first, allegedly, right? So they just walked out of the desert and leveled off 18 acres of a limestone hill perfectly, and then just started building pyramids. I don't know how it was done, but there's something here that we're not being told. I'm just here to try to figure it out and get these answers.
Yeah. No, I mean, it definitely, it's endlessly fascinating, because there are all these questions, and one leads to another, I mean, I actually like, in terms of Ancient Alien, I actually like the idea that 2001 presents, Arthur E. Clarke presents the idea of, did something come here and basically bestow intelligence upon us? Because that's another whole curious thing, right? Like, why just us? Of every creature on this planet, like, we're the ones that have all the intelligence and all the ability. And I don't know, that's another just interesting thought. I don't know. I like that theory as well. Came here,
well,
noted upon us, took off.
But isn't that, you brought it up yourself? Isn't that our goal? Right, to send probes out, and we're doing Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 and Pioneer 11, and the ET would definitely be doing the same thing. And that Arthur C. Clarke scenario with the monolith right here, as crazy as that sounds, it makes a lot of sense, because those are our goals too. Is to go and get as much stuff out there and discover as much as we can. What would we do if we did find primitive life on another planet? Will we teach them fire?
One would hope that, you would try to have some sort of meaningful interaction with them, right? But you're right. It is what we're doing. We are exploring. So why wouldn't some other being out there do the same thing? Again, it's the evidence. If we're doing it, sure, why wouldn't someone else be doing the same thing? To me, that makes a lot of sense.
Do you see, and I know that you touch upon this, and we are not alone, but is the overarching idea behind ET malevolent or benevolent?
I mean, to me, as far as we can tell, it seems to be benevolent, again, because we're here. To me, that's the evidence, right? If it wasn't, surely they would, if they can get here, surely they would have the technology to get rid of us if they wanted to. I mean, you could say benevolent too, if you look at a few examples I give in the book, in terms of UFOs spotted over nuclear sites and the messages that they seem to be sending that people have reported, seeing UFOs over like Malmstrom, for example, in the mid 1960s in Montana, where there were 10 ICBMs that went offline all at once. And I spoke with Captain Bob Salas, who was there, and he talks about this a lot in public, about the fact that one of these ICBMs going offline by a glitch would be incredibly rare, but for 10 of them to all go offline simultaneously when none of them are connected to each other, that's 10 glitches happening at the same time. Same thing happened a week or 2 weeks before that. 10 other ICBMs went offline. Another UFO was spotted, another base. And it's happened around the world. It's happened in Russia as well. So is there something where they're showing, hey, we have power, and letting you know that we can control that, and trying to prevent you from using something that's so destructive? If you look at it through that lens, and it feels like there's maybe some benevolent force out there that to some degree is maybe watching out for us. And if so, they could be doing a better job, by the way. But
yeah, for sure. And I would consider somebody like Bob Salas to be a contactee. And yeah, absolutely. And what do we do about them? Right? The contactees that have been repeating, well, for the most part, I'm not saying that everything is some benevolent, run through rainbows and unicorns type of contact experience for everybody. But in a general sense, the contactees have been repeating the same message, like you're saying, a maelstrom and interference and the protection of some type of guarantee that we were not going to destroy ourselves. But what do we do about those contactees? It can't be, tens of millions of people with some strange psychosis, right? What do we do about them through disclosure?
That's a good question. I mean, the contactees, when you say contactees, are you referring to the group in the 50s specifically, or just anyone who's had contact?
Start there. Yeah, no, but we can start there because that was also where these messages started. Yeah. But they go through all the way through to today. The contactees have repeated the same message, and I don't think it's because they've heard it from their neighbor, right, or read it in a book. I believe that their contact experiences, however they have happened, are real.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, the ones from the 50s are such they're they're very odd stories, right? Because the way they're presented, at least, which is I flew in a spaceship, I met the Venusians, I married a Venusian, I had a Venusian child, I went to the moon and Mars and the Venus. And and they're lecturing on these interactions they're having with, they usually turn them space people. And of course, that's all sounds a bit ridiculous, knowing what we know now, within within our own solar system. We know there's not a bunch of people on Venus. I think we can safely say that. But I like that their message was basically a response to the atomic age and the dangers of it. And I think what they were preaching was certainly a good message for, peace and responsibility. But yeah, the question is like, is that just the vehicle they were using to deliver a message? Maybe, could they have been receiving messages otherwise? Possibly. Abductees are very curious, or are they getting messages? Are they being taken and put back here? I don't know. It's definitely an interesting phenomena. And you're right. It's interesting that so many people have so many similar stories. And that also goes back, again, going back to connections. To me, that goes back to the same things as ghost sightings and people having the same kinds of experiences and sightings over millennia all around, cross cultures, right? No contact with each other, but still sharing the same kinds of experiences. So those things make you wonder if there's something to it. You can't just completely dismiss those things. So is there messages from other beings? They're being transmitted in some way from, the afterlife in some way, or is something just going on in their brains that's triggering different sensations and beliefs and thoughts? And maybe it's a little bit of all of the above. Who's to say it's one or the other specifically?
Moses did it. And people don't, right. And you can't, I'm getting in a touchy area here. But I'm speaking of the world in general. You can't dismiss ghost, ET, and the afterlife and dismiss that and then turn around and say Moses. Right? You got instructions from the Ark of the Covenant.
I don't think you can say, oh yes, I always think about that, like God and angels. Yes, we believe in God and angels, but no to these other things. Like, to me, it's like, isn't it the same thing? How is an angel different than the afterlife or aliens? I mean, they're extraterrestrial by definition, aren't they? So, yeah, I agree. I feel like if you can believe in this, how can you can't dismiss this? It's all, to me, it's all interesting possibilities. It's just we just need to, we want data to understand it for as a fact and have evidence.
That's right. Because it comes down to, and you said it earlier, it's such a great point. Our knowledge base and how we understand and perceive things, right? And then turn around and describe them. So, a situation like Moses or angels or Saint Michael, whatever you want to, God, right? Jesus, and start to go into these zones. Well, those were the words that we had available to us to describe the phenomena. That's the only reason why. And you've got to be able to communicate this to the rest of the village. And you can't go back to the village and say, little green men from Zeta Reticuli were here, and they said don't eat raw meat, right? Or whatever. To cook your chicken to 165 degrees. You can't do that. But if you say God said to cook your chicken to 165 degrees, then you've got everybody on the same page.
Yeah. Well, if you saw little green men from Zeta Reticuli, that would seem like God, right?
Or a leprechaun.
Yeah. I talked about a case from, I think, the 1600s or so of a woman who talked about being basically abducted by little small people in green outfits and being whisked through the stars and skies, and no one believing her when she came back. And it's one of these things, like, you read it, like, it sounds like
what case was this? Wait, I haven't heard this one.
Hang on, I'm blanking on her name now. I apologize, because
it's from
the book came out in October. I wrote it a while ago, so some of the facts.
You said 1600s?
I think 1600s. Oh, here it is. Anne Jeffreys. Yes, 17th century. So yeah, 1600s. Yeah, 1645. She said here, this was the quote from her. I was one day knitting of stockings in the arbor in the garden, and there came over the garden hedge of a sudden 6 small people, all in green clothes, which put me into such a great fright. That was the cause of my great sickness. And then she talked about going to she was whisked off to some distant place, quote, flying through the air to a beautiful land with temples and palaces made of gold and silver. And she wished to stay in that utopia forever, but was soon, quote, rolled through space and found herself back in a garden, surrounded by a small crowd who'd been witnessing her suffering from convulsions. And then she saw them again over time, and no one believed her. That's 1645.
Yeah. So that right there is probably more valuable than something more modern. But it's not any different than George Van Tassel's, encounter out at Giant Rock. And if somebody is being told, how do I say that they're from Venus, right? That maybe that is just the understanding that it's another planet. It's not necessarily Venus that is next to us.
Could be.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Terms again we can understand.
I was watching you remember Galaxy Quest, right? The historical documents, right? It's such a funny part of that movie. The historical documents being the TV series Galaxy Quest, right? Okay, so anyway, the historical record. But I was watching some black and white footage of some of the news reels in around 1960, 1959, 1960, 61 of contactees, right? Just man on the street interviews. And I went up, last night in a flying saucer and cruised around Earth and came back. They're really nice people. It's just like, now, and you're looking, and it's like your next door neighbor's mom saying this stuff. You know what I mean? And is it just somebody wanting to be a part of a group and they're just going to make this stuff up? Or were these real events, or were they visions that were channeled to them? And, that it seemed real, some type of simulation. But I just don't think that I have a hard time understanding or believing that all of these people were just making it up for funny ha-ha stuff. I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, and it could be a little bit of all the above too. I agree. There's so many cases where it's like they can't all be doing that. And a lot of times it's not like they're all out trying to make a buck. That's often not the case. I get into some of those stories, and we're not alone also. But there's also some interesting tests that have been done that like I talked about this in my previous book, Chasing Ghosts. There's a scientist named Michael Persinger who created this thing called the God helmet. I don't know if you've heard of, the God helmet. So basically, sending in basically electromagnetic pulses into the temporal lobes and controlling it and having complete sensory deprivation with people wearing it. And people were coming out describing seeing ghosts and God, hence the name, the God helmet, and UFOs and aliens. And so what was going on with these electromagnetic pulses into the temporal lobe of the brain that was making them have that sensation that they were seeing these different things? So what's that? Like, that's another weird mystery. Our brains are another weird mystery that we don't know a whole lot about. Are there more answers inside there? And again, that's just a thought. That does not, to me, explain a lot of the other things that are out there. But maybe it explains a few things, which could still be interesting to know.
Do you think that consciousness is of the physical or exists in the non-physical?
So this is a good question. And I'll tell you, I'm working on a new book now, and I just took a class in remote viewing.
Mm-hmm.
And just part of the research, and it's interesting to kind of put myself into it versus just, reading and interviewing people, but actually immerse myself into it a little bit. And I said I'd never seen a UFO other than the weird thing I saw with the stars zipping around, but I don't know what that was, but haven't seen a ghost. But it seems that I can remote view. and I was so blown away by being able to experience it firsthand. Doing what our teacher was talking about. His name was Paul Smith. He was in the
I know Paul.
Stargate
Yeah,
program.
Paul's a cool dude. Yeah, Paul. Yeah. Paul is. Have you broke bread with Paul? Have you sat down?
I did the classes. I told him I want to talk to him. And that was just ended last week. So I'm hoping that we do that soon because I really want to talk to him more.
Just go out with Paul and have like a 4-hour dinner. Okay, just do it. That man, that is one cool cat, man. That is one cool cat. Okay, yeah. So now what does that tell you, right?
That's what I'm saying. So I basically, we have 3 chances to do remote viewing with him. So he'd give us a target. Next week we'd see how we did, right? We'd submit. No idea what this thing could be or where he might be. Could be anything. He could be standing next to a zebra at a zoo. You know what I mean? Like, it could be literally anything. And the first week I was pretty impressed with details I got. And again, you might see what you want to see. I get that, right? Second week, same thing. Like, I got some pretty good details here. Again, it's like, it could have been anywhere. But then the last week, the clearest image I had in my head, and he had gone somewhere. It was called an outbounder as a beacon. So he was there physically. I then did a retrocognitive remote viewing session because I did after the fact. Anyway, the clearest thing I had in my head was sort of like a dome shape with like kind of a grid and then columns I drew. And that was, I remember, the clearest thing in my head is an impression that I wasn't defining what it was or anything like that. I had a few other small lines and some squares and things like that. And he shows us where he is. And I recorded the class so I can have the audio if I want to refer back to it. And I hear myself go, oh, like when I see it, like listen back. He was in front of a dome-shaped structure with columns. I think it's called the Centurium at Utah State University, something. I might be messing that up, but I couldn't believe it. I'm like, and he showed my thing in class. I was excited about that. I'm like, holy crap. It's like we were saying, like with the UFOs, it's going to be hard to believe something because of all the fake stuff we have now, unless you're really seeing it for yourself. And when you see it for yourself and you experience it for yourself, it's like, oh my God, I don't know what to make of this other than that there's something here. So when you ask me about consciousness, is it physical or not? Having just gone through that, it just feels to me that there does seem to be something connecting us in some way. And that again ties back to ghosts, that people like Edgar Cayce, Leonore Piper, who were somehow receiving information. Who the hell knows how that was happening? Because that stuff seems like it's hard to fake, like really hard to fake the stuff they were doing versus other mediums that were, creating manifestations through, I think, more clever physical means. But that stuff makes you wonder what's going on. And it's interesting because think it was Ingo Swann actually termed it as the Matrix long before the movie,
Right.
as a place where all information is coming together, and are we accessing it in some ways? And so I don't know. And we actually have the question: is it physical or non-physical? And then does it even matter? This was one of the questions Paul brought up in the class. I don't know that it matters. I think it's either way. I'm excited about what we learn. If it's physical, to me, how can we tap into that in more interesting ways and make positive use out of it? If it's not physical, then wow, there's a whole other area that we have a lot to learn about, and who knows what we can learn from it. But somehow it seems like there's some connections that maybe some of us tune into. Maybe we can all learn to do it. I was thinking too, like for me, this was 3 weeks. I don't know, I'm just doing it for 20, 30 minutes during a week when I have a chance. But these guys were doing it with incredible results. And is it like anything where if you practice, can you actually get good at this thing?
Every remote viewer that I have spoken to, and I've spoken to the best, right? All tell me the same exact thing. Practice. We all have that ability. You just got to know how to tap into it and to get what is in your head down onto a piece of paper. And that just comes with practice. But we all have that ability. Now, let's back up. We were just talking about Egypt and moving rocks and things. And so that back then, Mark, this is my take. Back then, we didn't have distractions of TV, social media, the internet, and everything else, right, that we have involving the blockage of the mind. But back then, all you had was your mind, right? And they knew how to use it.
True.
They did. So when we talk about things of, telepathy or people that have talked about this ability, not only just recently, but through the distant past, right? And the communication of I absolutely believe they exercised those muscles. They practiced that and they understood it. They absolutely tapped into it. We got amnesia. That's all. And we got away from it. But you taking this class and others, and I think that there's ayahuasca and some other things that will definitely scientifically show us how to tap into these parallel worlds that actually exist. Like Ingo Swann said, it's the Matrix. And the God helmet is a very good example of that. That it's just a frequency off of our reality, but it all exists.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I've got to tell you, I was absolutely fascinated by that experience, and I'm so glad I did it because of that. Like I know I'll be able to write this new book with a whole different lens, having gone through that, at least for that particular section. But yeah, it does. It opens up more possibilities and more reasons to think that there's something to all of this.
Years ago, now I Ingo Swann and Stargate and SRI and again, I've talked to everybody that was, not everybody, but most of the people that were involved with SRI and the original Stargate stuff. And but okay, all right, it's a good book, it's a good story, and then you see it happen. And I was on a platform. I'll just say that. I don't want to get into specifics. I see. I have 3 remote viewers and myself on the screen with the person running the session. Okay. And they've all got envelopes. You know the drill, right? They've all got targets. And I'm watching these 3 draw on pads of paper this big that are mounted on what do you call it? An easel, right? And they're just drawing. I'm watching, right? Now, 3 different parts of the world, by the way. Okay. Right? And I'm watching this in real time. And in the beginning, they were all off. it whittled down. They couldn't see each other. They whittled down, and suddenly they're drawing the same thing, and they're talking about the same thing, and they're flipping the page. And in about it took about 60 minutes. I'm going to say it was about an hour. Identical. And then they ripped open their envelopes. I can't get into this is a private thing, right? They rip open the envelopes and show them on the screen what the targets were. And I got to tell you, man, I peed on myself. and so when you know what I mean? And when it's a whole other thing, I was totally skeptical, and I appreciate it. And I know people have talents, and my mom was crazy, and I get all of that. But when you see it happen in real time like that, and you see how the mind works, and they zoned in, and man, and I'm going to say it, identical. It was crazy, man. It was absolutely nuts. Yeah. And when I wanted to ask you this, because I was watching it in real time, when you looked at your dome, right, in the columns and the shapes, and then you're looking at the picture of Paul Smith, right, the image of him, were you like, oh man, what was it like that?
Yeah, I literally would like this. I mean, I sit by myself in a room, with no one around me, and I'm on mute, of course, because Paul's just doing the class. But I gasped out loud, and then we have a little chat in the group. So I wrote, "Oh my god, this is so freaky!" All right, so like I'm freaked out, and then there were other things that Paul pointed out in my drawing that I just caught to the dome right away. Where it's like, oh, I'd written mountain range. He's like, oh, there is a mountain range there. And I had drawn some squares, and then you see that there are like these sort of square tiles in front of it. He's like, it looks like you were looking above, not or whatever. That was the impression coming in. And so, yeah, I was really like thrown off seeing it. I honestly was. And even like when I drew this thing, I had the dome, I did like the cross thing, and you see that similar type of style in the physical thing. And the columns, I drew 2 columns on the side, but then I drew a third one in the back, like shorter, to kind of represent, like, it felt like dimension to me. And that, to me, that little extra detail made it even a little crazier, because this thing was, obviously circular. So yeah, very, very strange experience. Very strange. I'm excited to speak to Dale Graff next week. I'm going to interview him. I got to follow up with Paul. But yeah, it's quite a journey so far.
Yeah, and when I saw in your notes, it's just kind of funny that we're talking about this. And where to go? The telepathic Martian woman.
Oh yeah,
in the 1920s, and now. Well, I don't want to. I want you to explain what I am talking about here, because that is exactly the idea of telepathy or remote viewing or consciousness or entanglement, and that type of communication is something that is very real if you practice it. What is this story about?
Well, I love this story. This is a story that got me into writing the Big Book of Mars to begin with, which then helped lead into We Are Not Alone. So I'll just say this took place in 1926. And in the 20s, there was a lot of belief and studies in telepathy. And that was all sort of spawning out of spiritualism, communication with the dead, communication, with each other. Physicists were studying this and doing tests and so forth. So anyway, in 1926, there was this man in London. His name was Dr. Hugh Robinson Mansfield, and he claimed to have been in telepathic communication with a Martian woman whose name was Umaruru. And Umaruru was described as being about 7 feet tall. She had big, tall hair. I liken to like a Marge Simpson style hairdo based on his description. Big ears. And he was just in telepathic communication with her and giving us all this information about what life was like on Mars and how it was so much better and more advanced. And this was being published in newspapers and across the world. And so I stumbled upon this article by accident. I was actually looking for a story about Nikola Tesla's attempts to contact Mars. And I found this and thought, what's this story? This is kind of nuts. And I just dug into that and found more and more. And eventually got in touch with the British Telecommunications Archive and got hundreds of pages of information from them, from newspaper clippings to letters written to the post office in London, because ultimately what he did was he had a telegram sent to Mars through the radio tower, the Rugby radio tower, which was the largest and most powerful radio tower on Earth at the time, run by the post office. So he got the long distance rate to send the message to Mars, which I also thought was funny. And this was almost like free advertising for the post office because they got so much press about sending a message to Mars for their long distance rate. So there's lots of communications between the two about the message and how that's going to work and what time it's going to be sent. And it was done in 1926, and then again in 1928, by the way, because Mars was in opposition. So it was at its closest point to Earth. Therefore, maybe we have a chance to communicate with these intelligent beings on Mars, who, through Umaruru, we knew were waiting for us to send the message because the scientists were in touch with Umaruru. Of course, we heard nothing back. And that was blamed on our scientists not being smart enough to receive the communications from the Martian scientists. And they were laughing at us and annoyed that we were so dumb, basically. There were a lot of beliefs like this back then, by the way. So as odd as that sounds, he wasn't alone. But yeah, I mean, this was all belief in telepathy. And what's interesting is a lot of other beliefs in intelligent life on Mars. This was just, like I said, he was a lawyer in London, but there were a lot of major scientists and astronomers who believed that there might be intelligent life on Mars. A lot of them thought that they were communicating telepathically, that they were evolved and the thin atmosphere would make it easier to just send signals to each other. That's why you see Martians with antennas all the time, because that's actually what they thought they might use for communication. So yeah, all this stuff, again, it's all connected. It all goes back to early beliefs, scientific reasonings why these things might be based on the physics they knew about the planet at the time. And it just all keeps growing.
Yeah, well, Tesla, people talk about Tesla because, well, he's fascinating and definitely thought outside of the box. And just, what if it was all true, right? That's the part of Tesla, right? So we can all sit here and speculate. But he had a way of making headlines, and he was a very, 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 he was a genius, a very smart guy. But when he starts testing his radio equipment, and him and Marconi are in a race, right? And that was a really big deal, leading edge technology. But he comes back he makes a statement, man, I'm picking up radio signals from Mars. Well, that's a headline. That's a big, big headline. And when Tesla says something like that, and it's in the paper, and he's now quoted, and he's trying to figure this out, there were different, how do I say that? Different researchers around the world that were all doing the same thing.
Yeah.
They were trying to listen to the atmosphere. They were trying to listen to space. They were trying to, they were building control. And there was a lot of pulses and codes and things all the way through the 1920s that was picked up around the world. Some say it was the Black Knight satellite too, as well.
There was a lot of headlines about when we would be talking to Martians. It could be any day now for decades into the early 1900s. This, by the way, is what I really love about the War of the Worlds situation, 1938, with the panic after Orson Welles did his broadcast. Because to me, like growing up hearing that story, it sounded ridiculous. Like, how could people think that? But you look in the context of what people have been reading in the newspapers from people like Tesla and Marconi, even Edison. I mean, the smartest people on the planet were saying that we could talk to Martians any day now, plastered over newspapers all the time. So when it sounds like it might be happening, the way Wells did that broadcast was, if you missed the beginning, if you missed the disclaimer, very convincing the way he used the medium. It's not that hard to believe that people thought like, oh, it's finally happening. This is what we've been hearing about for years, as opposed to just out of the blue, which, would seem a little odd. But yeah, they kind of been primed for it.
Yeah, and here's the funny part. And I'm going to thank you, Mark. It was a great conversation. I look forward to when you're on with us again. We'll talk about strange stuff. Tonight we're talking about normal stuff. Next time you're on, I do want to talk about Cromwell's embalmed head. That's a whole show in itself. But why is it, and in a general sense, that everything seems to be a step out of reach? Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, religion, life after death, and anything like it is always just one step or a half a step away from us. Why is it just something as simple as maybe we're just not supposed to know?
I mean, it could be. Maybe we're just not there yet. It just takes a little more time to find out some of these answers. Things take time to find out. Yeah, but I mean, who knows? Think about how all the things we have found, how magical they used to seem, and then they weren't. So, is this just more things to chase and find answers to eventually? Hopefully. But again, I said earlier, to me, like, still having these mysteries keeps things interesting for us and just keeps us searching and keeps us wondering, which I think is great. I do like that part of it.
Like the Great Pyramid. Have you been to Egypt?
I have not.
Okay.
Someday maybe.
Dude, just go. Okay. Just go. And also Peru. It's the same ginormity involved with it. But go to Egypt. And then come back and let's have a conversation. Yeah, that's a paradigm shift. That's a paradigm shift. Egypt is something because there's so much of it, right? And so you don't understand while you're there. You have to come back and unpack, right? It just takes a minute. But you see so much of it that the plane flight back, you're in silence. You just, it's crazy. It's crazy. You're constantly reviewing because none of it makes any sense. It doesn't make any sense. So there you go. You got to go to Egypt and then write that book and then come back on the show. Mark, behave and be well. Where can everybody reach out to you? What's the easiest?
You can check out my site, markhartzmanbooks.com. I'm on Twitter just at Marc Hartzman, or Instagram at Marc Hartzman. You see my name there, Mark with a C. So yeah, pretty easy that way. Yeah, please check out the book. The book's available everywhere: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any bookstore you go to, any other place you buy online.
It's a fantastic read. All of your stuff is. Mark, I've been a fan for years. Thank you so much for taking the time tonight. Behave and be well. Happy holidays, and stay warm out there in New York.
Thanks. You too, Jimmy. Appreciate it.
Great conversation. Marc Hartzman. And it's very simple, everybody. The links are below. MarcHartzmanBooks.com and WeirdHistorian.com. And of course, at Marc Hartzman, that's Mark with a C on social media. All right, there you go. I want everybody to have a great, safe, fun, and amazing weekend. The holidays are officially here. All right. All right. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you to Dennis and Kevin. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Genocide. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, SpaceboyMusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2023 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your Jimmy Church. I'll see everybody on Monday. Until then, go Beckley Tappy.